Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're going to continue forward with the great parenting book by my friend Ted Moss. Look out, I'm parenting here, a survival guide for the single parent. Today we're going to be going over a brand new set of tips 4 through 7, for parenting your very own toddler. And I am just going to go to the first slide. Let's kick things off. Last time we talked about the first 3 tips. Um, and actually, before I start off with that, we talked even just a little bit about the state of the world as it is today, and why I'm reading this book. Because, again, to review, I'm not a parent, I'm single, I'm not in a relationship. But why am I reading this book? Well, partly I know the author, a good friend of mine, Ted Moss. But also partly that I know I will be a parent someday. I will be a parent someday. And I want to make sure that I am just better equipped at understanding how to navigate your whole life once you have somebody else in it that's more important than you. And I think that is kind of lost. We talked about an author last time who wrote a book. Oh gosh, I forget her name. We'd have to go back and look at the other slides, but she wrote a book on how kids today are kind of less behaved. They're not as good as the kids that were way back in the day. And I'm sure that's kind of a controversial thought. Maybe that's not all kids, but certainly it doesn't help that we have a less of a focus on community. We have media encroaching more and more in our lives. Our cell phones, things that we hold in our hands, are taking over our attentions. And kids potentially are spending less time just interacting with one another. It's much easier to just have them interact with something that can hold in the palm of their hand, right? So all of these kind of contribute to how kids are different today. Let me use that language, because I don't know if it's worse, because I'm sure there's kids who are just as good, but it's different now than it was back in the day. And I think a book like this will help you to not get caught up in all the other bullshit, and parent the way that is the most effective. And I think that's what we have here in this book. So last time we talked about tips 1 through 3. We talked about the first, number 1, let love be your guide, which means basically no matter what, you default back to love. Anything you do is out of love for your child. I don't think we should feel ashamed or feel wrong for doing the things that we do with our toddlers, for like the punishment, the positivity that we give them. It should stem from the seed of love. So let love be your guide in this whole journey of toddlerhood, raising your toddler. Next, number 2, we talked about creating structure. And you can expect chaos until you put in structure. I think those were the first words from that chapter that Ted had mentioned. And you do this, there was a step-by-step like program that you do with your toddler that Ted talked about, which is you first state the rule. You state it in a certain way that involves everybody in the household. So instead of saying you have to take your shoes off whenever you come into the house, you would say we take off our shoes when you come back to the house, because a child isn't going to have the awareness of self and the difference between me as the parent and the child, right? So it's better to just leave out the logic, and that's the kind of the fourth step here. But you state the rule, state it in a very specific way, be direct, use and circle everybody in the household, have the child repeat it back to you, because this will truly test to see if the child understands what instructions you are giving them. And it's better if they repeat it back in their own words. And then the last thing is just, again, Be direct, concise. Don't put in any logic. Again, you're talking to a toddler here. It's going to be hard for them to reason and to grasp why we are doing certain things. So if you leave out the logic, you're going to leave out the debate. And how crazy is it going to be if you're debating with, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old? It's not going to look good. So I kind of like that kind of step-by-step program that Ted laid out. Following along with this, we talked then about tip number 3, which is being consistent. So if you enforce rules in the household, you got to enforce them, be ready to enforce them in other places too. So if it's at your house, or if it's at your parents' house, the child's grandparents' house, or if it's at their mother's house, maybe you're separated or divorced, there has to be some sort of congruency between all of those. They can't be doing different things over here than they do at your house. Now, all of a sudden, the child's potentially getting confused. They can get away with certain things with your parents, but not with you. So just be consistent. And Ted talks about the rule of 3. It eventually, if you want anything to stick in your mind, you should do it 3 times. So let's say you introduce yourself to somebody and you find out somebody's name, you repeat it 3 times, maybe you're more likely to remember it. So you use this kind of same logic with your toddler, and you kind of remind them of a rule 3 times. And maybe 3 is kind of an arbitrary number. Maybe it takes a little more, maybe it takes a little less, but the key is just to have it be stuck in their mind so you don't have to remind them of it anymore. And Ted talked about later in the chapter about going from specific instructions to something very general. So you can specifically lay out the actions you want them to take, let's say in the morning or at night before bed. Then all of a sudden you start peeling back the layers. You start giving just very general instructions, or just less and less instructions, to the point where you could just say like a few words, hey, time for bed. And the child knows from that word, from that statement, I got to pick up my toys, I got to brush my teeth, I got to change into my pajamas, I got to maybe sometimes shower. So all those things were dwindled down from saying all 4 of those statements to now just one specific statement. Hey, time to get ready for bed. So that's where it should end up going to, because you don't want to have to just lay out the specific instructions every time to your child. So go from specific to very general. Okay. So next, tips 4 through 7, starting with number 4, establishing control. Establishing control, and I think in general this is kind of seen as like a very negative thing. Don't you guys agree? Like parents today would probably look at this and see this as a negative thing, establish control. But I think this is a very important thing. You don't want to become accustomed to their bad behavior, so you need to establish some control. When you become accustomed to their bad behavior, all of a sudden you become just used to it. You start to not even notice it when it happens, especially if it's something out in public. They throw a tantrum. All of a sudden, you're not trying to correct the behavior because, well, you've kind of let it slide for so long and a lot of time has passed by. Then now it's just part of everyday life for you. So that's not good. How do we establish control? We need a control key, Ted talks about. So a control key is something you do or say that commands absolute and immediate compliance from your children. And the key words here are absolute and immediate, not 10 seconds from now. And Ted talks about in here the old adage, I think that many parents use, is I'm going to count to 10. When I get to 1, you better be in bed. Something like that as an example. Well, Ted says here, and I kind of agree with him, that doesn't really work because it allows the bad behavior to continue for another 10 seconds. And then later on, the child will always know that they have an extra 10 seconds to do whatever bad behavior they want to do. They're not going to take it as seriously. So your control key needs to be something immediate now, and it must imply immediate discipline for noncompliance. The toddler has to completely understand this, and the discipline has to be not positive. It can't be something that they take in a positive way. And you only bring out this discipline if it can be done immediately. So you see a lot of key words here. So absolute, immediate, discipline, noncompliance. Basically, you need to be ready to discipline your child if they don't follow the rules. Else, how are they going to take you seriously as a parent? Next slide here. So an example of a control key that Ted uses in the book is his use of the phrase right now. And it kind of sounds like this is something he says very direct, pointed. He's not yelling when he says it. It's very probably stern and very serious. And again, I think children can pick up on tones a lot more than you think they could. I know I probably could. I could probably tell like when the tone of the voice of like my dad or mom changed from something very playful to something very serious. I think that's something children can kind of get. So Ted here's not yelling. It's just right now. That was his control key, and his kids knew they need to do whatever Ted is asking them to do, basically, in that situation. Why shouldn't you yell? Well, Ted explains that volume should not be a control key because now your children aren't going to take you seriously unless you yell. So are you willing to yell in public, in front of other people, right? So the control key, you got to be ready to use that in all facets of life, not just in your home. So I think that's where I think parents get caught up. I get caught up on this too when I was coming up like as a kid and trying to get like my younger brothers and sisters to do stuff, just yelling. And I don't think it works because all of a sudden if you don't yell, well, they're not going to take you seriously. Think about it like this, Ted says. If you were tied up and could not rescue your child from walking off the edge of a nearby cliff, how would you do it? Right? Would you yell? Would you just have a phrase? Would you be firm in your voice? Would you be, I don't know, not firm in your voice? Think about that. Think about your control keys should be something so clear that they would not walk off that edge of that nearby cliff, and you wouldn't have to yell to do that. Next tip. Tolerating anger. Let me actually go to this chapter. There we go. Tip number 5, tolerate anger. Be ready for your little one to be mad at you. And I wrote here, you got to get used to it because it's not going to be the last time. It's not going to be the first, and it's not going to be the last time. You have to tolerate anger because you're not your child's friend. They're going to get really mad at you in ways that they're not going to get mad at their friends. You have responsibilities as a parent that their friends don't have. So think about how weird it looks when you invoke the same emotions that they do. You know, you're the parent here. You have to be maybe you have to be kind of stoic. I mean, that's kind of what I do. I try to do with people. When I see people getting like emotional, if we're like debating a topic, something like that, I try not to get emotional. Just here's what I think, and you do what's right for you. Because I think when you both get emotional, then nothing's really ever solved, right? So you want to maintain your cool while they lose theirs. Eventually, they will learn. I see this in my life where every time I got super upset at something my parents done, eventually and it might have taken a while. It might have taken like a few years even, but eventually I just thought, oh, you know what? Yeah, they're right. Like I kind of got a little upset. I'm looking for condos right now, and I got upset that we're seeing like we saw like a very nice condo, and I wanted to just kind of like jump on it right away. But my parents were telling me, you know what, this is only like the first one you've seen. You might want to like take a look at others. And I was like, I really don't want to. This one's nice. But eventually I got it within a few days. Like, oh, yeah, I need a reference point. Okay, that's my fault. So notice here, Ted, you tolerate anger, but you do not tolerate them making a scene, because that's really where children are seeking attention. They're seeking attention from you. They want you to get emotional as well. So if they want to make a scene, tell them. And Ted, I think, uses this example in the book where, hey, if you want to cry, go in your room or go somewhere else. And Ted actually says you shouldn't use their room as a punishment. This is kind of interesting because then it becomes hard to go to bed, get a good night's sleep when they think of their room as a place where they, go for punishment. So that's kind of interesting. Ted says we're going to talk about that later in the book, but don't tolerate them making a scene. They can make a scene, but in private. Come back when you're done. And you should have rules about how their anger may be expressed. So if you want them to express some behaviors, just be ready to allow them to express those in public too, not just in your home. And I think that's a very good point. We just talked about this. I mean, wasn't it just like a few slides ago? I kind of just forgot. But the behaviors you tolerate at home will be the behaviors that they also do out in public. So have rules for how their anger may be expressed. Tip number 6, raise their spirit. It's from page 25. There is a fine line that you must walk when disciplining your toddler. So what does this mean, raise their spirit? You can't destroy their confidence, especially at this young of an age. Think about how confident toddlers are. They just walk right into things. They say what's on their mind. They feel like they're impenetrable, invincible. They feel like supermen and women, right? You don't want to destroy this confidence because this is going to have effects later on in their life. And I remember somebody, controversial guy, Dan Pena, was saying something about like I think it was something about self-confidence and not enthusiasm, but something like that. Yes, self-confidence is really built within like the first 7 years of life, something to that effect. And this is kind of the point that Ted's getting at here. The most imposing figure in your child's life is going to be you to start, right? So your children need to feel what it's like to go up against that imposing figure. And your children are going to push back on you every once in a while. It's your job as a parent to walk that fine line and let them win sometimes, if they have the conviction for it and if they're strong in what they believe in, even if sometimes they're not really right to do that. And Ted mentions this again, it's a fine line, but you have to let them win in order to build up that courage to stand up to the person who's like physically imposing, but also emotionally like kind of imposing. This is your parent. You don't want to go against them, but my conviction is so strong. I feel like I should be able to do this. No, I'm putting my foot down and I want to do this. That's going to help your child grow and face the reality of what's out there in the world. Because out there in the real world, they're not going to have you there to protect them all the time. So you need to have that. You need to help them build up that courage to go out there and face the real world. Again, Ted says you want to raise a well-balanced and strong child, not a perfect one. next slide, and the last tip is be a parent. We kind of talked about this just a short while ago, but your children are going to have many friends, but only one set of parents. Friends are going to come and go, but being a parent is forever. So I'll never forget this. Chris Webber, when he was on TNT, they were talking about they were talking about something basketball related. Like kids today in basketball, AAU coaches, and he said coaches now just kind of want to be one of the boys, whereas before coaches were, more of like father figures. They were like police officers who coached on the side, like the firefighters who coached on the side, like the local pastor who coached on the side. But now these coaches want to be boys with the players. And it kind of potentially leads to negative effects. Again, these kids kind of maybe feel entitled. They didn't have somebody pushing back on them in AAU. So they get to college and they feel like they can just run the place, right? So again, you're a parent first and always and forever. You lose that authority if you become just one of the friends. But you shouldn't want to try to fit in with the cool kids. And Ted uses a quote in this chapter. I think it said, let me make sure I have this right. Familiarity breeds contempt. Let me find it really quick for you guys. This was a short chapter. Yes, familiarity breeds contempt. So if you're constantly trying to appease them and constantly being a helicopter and being always around them, they're gonna not like that. Familiarity breeds contempt. They're gonna have contempt for that. So keep your authority. You're there to be a parent. You're there to modify behavior. You're there to make sure that one day when they set sail off into the real world, that you equip them with the best behaviors and the best tips and the best, ways to survive out there. And you're not going to do that if you're a friend to them. Friends are important, but being a parent is the most important. And guys, that's going to do it today. Thank you guys so much for listening this far. Next time we are going to do tips. We'll probably do tips 8 through 11 for next time. Thank you guys again. If you have any questions, comments, I'd love to hear your stories of parenting and, maybe help me out, give me some tips. Let me know what you think about Ted's tips here. Let me know if you have any other questions, comments, concerns. Leave them down in the section below. Please like and subscribe. We're going to have more and more videos coming to you every single week, almost every single week. And that's going to do it, guys. My name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care.